Hello and welcome to another edition of the Mayor Dan Plaetko Show. I'm very pleased to have as my guest today Jack McIntyre, and Jack is our director of our Ordinance Department. Jack, thank you for being a guest on my show.
Thanks for having me.
And as this last weekend we had to move our clocks, spring forward, and the weather's getting very nice. I'm even starting to see my tulips come out of the ground. It's a great time to do some cleanup. So we're here to discuss about some things that the city is going to participate in. We want to let all the residents know, but at the same time, we want to encourage them that now's the opportunity to do some personal cleanup around their properties.
Right. Yeah, we've been working. We've been having meetings talking about how we're going to address some of the blight issues in the community, as well as some recent calls and complaints regarding an increase where people are seeing rodent activity. So that's what we're doing. We're planning, I've mentioned it before at a council meeting, that we've already done one sweep. And basically what a sweep is we have all the ordinance officers, they typically work throughout the city. We have them all concentrate on a particular area, and we just kind of do a heavy enforcement of that area. Mm-hmm. Some of them even just walk down the street, they look at properties, they look at just failing things on the property, if a gutter is loose, if garbage cans are being stored incorrectly, if they notice an animal that's not licensed, they address that. So we've actually got about 10 of them planned for the entire year. We've just done one, and we're getting ready to do one in about 3 weeks, or about 4 weeks actually. What will happen is residents will get a letter in the mail from the Ordinance Department. It'll let them know that in 3 weeks that we're going to be coming to do a sweep in that particular area, and we're going to take it in small sections throughout the city. It'll give people 3 weeks kind of notice to look at whether or not they have things stored outside, stored on the ground. We want to discourage that, anything stored on the ground. If they do have an animal that the ordinance says that they need to pick up the droppings from an animal immediately, they're not supposed to be left on the property. Things that we think may be drawing rodents to property, those are the things that we're going to be addressing when we go out and do those sweeps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, what you have organized is the whole city is in districts.
Right.
And we do that for the police department too. And the logic being that an ordinance officer will get a good feel and understanding for that district and be able to respond and look at things. And so that's an advantage. But you'll grab and collapse all those districts into one area.
Correct.
And then do they physically drive or walk?
Yeah, what they'll do on that sweep day is they'll actually get out of the car. They'll probably be assigned to 2 streets, maybe a total of 9 blocks. Mm-hmm. And so they'll physically get out and they'll walk up one end of the street and then walk back down the other end, and they'll just visit each property on an individual basis and look for those kinds of things. It was interesting, we did the sweep just about a month ago, and we were filled with a lot of phone calls. Primarily what we did that day was we asked a lot of folks to take garbage cans and move them and store them away from their home. We have an ordinance that says that garbage cans and trash need to be stored out of the view from the street, and we noticed that that's not happening. And one of the things, as we're doing education with the public and we're talking to folks, is we're saying, we definitely don't want to draw rodents to garbage, and we certainly don't want a garbage can near your side door, because then that invites them to come into your house. So store your garbage in a can, preferably with a tight lid on it, and store it as far away from your house as possible and out of view from the street. Mm-hmm. That's what the ordinance requires.
And we are in the process of creating a request for a proposal from refuge collectors, and we will be going to the bins that most of the areas have. So that'll have a natural cover on it.
Yeah.
But we still need those to be back. The other point, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the policy's been is that this is not to generate revenue. This is not intended to be mean in some way, shape, or form. It's to get compliance, to make the neighborhoods look nicer, and invariably, that is really the purpose of this whole thing. So we won't probably be unusual if during one of these sweeps a resident was to get a ticket. Is it more likely to get a plan of action?
Actually, it will be set up. What normally happens is someone visits a property and they're given a 7-day notice, and then 7 days later the officer schedules himself back at that property to see if that issue has been resolved. If it's not been resolved or it's been partially resolved, we usually give them another 7 days. And then if they're not in compliance at that point, we probably would issue a ticket. We decided with this sweep, we're going to give them actually a 3-week notice through virtue of this mailing. And that's really 3 weeks to say, and there's really just 5 things that we're asking them to look at. 5 really simple things that can be corrected pretty quickly. We're not asking people to replace their roofs if their roofs are failing. We're just really talking about property maintenance issues, things that are drawing this rodent or rat activity to properties. So we are, this letter is going to be a service of 3 weeks notice to say, look, we're going to be there in 3 weeks, and if it's not corrected or we haven't seen that there's a significant improvement on this, then you could, be issued a ticket for that. So there would be tickets issued.
Okay, so the real intent is compliance, and that's what we're attempting to do.
Yeah, and we've always been very flexible with that. In fact, we try to be, when people tell us what's going on, certainly if it's something like a roof that's failing or something that involves the structure of the property, we know that there's more involved with that. They might have to get an inspection. They might have to secure money to have those things repaired, and we try to be as flexible as possible with that. These are just things about storing, basically. Animal feces on the property, abandoned vehicles in the driveway that create a haven for animals, or even not just rats or rodents, but dogs and cats to kind of hang around. Things, wood piles that are on the ground where they should be elevated off the ground, yard waste that's being stored in a pile. Some people have compost piles. We're in this letter that they get, it's going to describe these 5 things that we're going to be specifically looking at. And we don't feel that it's anything that's not reasonable that you couldn't accomplish in probably a week, but we're going to give them like a 3-week notice on that.
Yeah, it's always been surprising, but I've seen it time and time again, where animals, critters, burrow underneath. People say, well, I've got the chimney and I'm just storing the wood, but the wood needs to be elevated and off the ground, because that does become a source for these animals to collect under. What's the difference between animals that we would get involved with as a department, as a city, versus animals that you would need to call a private agency, let's say? And that's a question that I get periodically.
Well, when we became certified through the state of Michigan, and we sent myself and then 4 officers through animal control training, the certification that we have through the state of Michigan is to only deal with dogs and cats, and then we can deal with unhealthy wildlife. So if someone sees that maybe a raccoon or a squirrel or a possum has been injured, maybe it fell from a tree or it was hit by a car, then they can call us and we'll respond to that. We have the ability to take that animal, get hold of the animal, take it to a shelter, and then they can deem what's the best thing to do with the animal. Either try to rehabilitate it and reintroduce it in the community, and sometimes if the health is failing, then they would have to euthanize the animal. But on a daily basis, what we address in terms of animal control are dogs and cats, but we also have the component where we're doing the vector control piece as well. So,
and I enjoy for my exercise, walking, and it's not uncommon in areas of the city to see deer. That's very prevalent. Possums, skunks. Wildlife is coming back in an urban setting, but those are all type of animals that we as a community really can't be capturing or doing things in regards to those kind of animals.
Yeah, in fact, we've been looking at trapping some of the feral cats that we have in the community, especially where they're in excessive numbers. And if we go to the trap hours later and it has a raccoon or a possum in it, we actually are obligated to just release the animal from the cage and let it go on its own. We cannot transport those animals through the certification that we have through the Department of Agriculture. And it's true. I just took a phone call today in the office where someone had called and said that there's been a pesky skunk in their area for about a year, and there's really not a whole lot that we can do about that. We are surrounded by water sources and by woods, which is nice. A lot of people enjoy the scenery, but along with that comes some of these other animals that also inhabit themselves around those water sources and the wooded areas. So
yeah, we had one facility in the city. I don't know that I'm going to mention it on air, but had a significant skunk population, and then we called a service, they started eliminating, and then the calls started coming in from the neighborhood. But once again, I've noticed that on garbage day in a lot of the areas, and that's one of the reasons we want to get away from the plastic bags into containers,
Yeah.
is that that's become buffet night for some of these critters.
Right.
And when you're out there walking, as a walker, you have to be really concerned, because maybe somebody put in that garbage something that the smell was really encouraged the appetite of this skunk or possum, and they're out there eating away. And I more than once have run into the skunk, although I found they seemed to be as stunned as I was, and I just backed up or ran away from that animal. But getting back to ordinance items, what would you say is the top 4 or 5 items that we run into, and things that residents could quickly clean up and improve their habitat and the surrounding neighborhood?
I think one thing that we're seeing a lot when we go to properties, especially in response to some of the rodent calls that we get, is that the animal feces on the property, and that our ordinance says that can never be left. So as a general rule, what I tell people is, just the first time you let your animal out, just go ahead and follow him out there. As soon as he uses the facilities, so to speak, then just pick it up, put it in a bag, and put it in your garbage. And then, even if it's a dog that, likes to spend, an hour or so outside running around, then at least you've got that part of it. The second thing is, we have a lot of people that are feeding birds and ground feeding. And, people will say, I'm feeding the squirrels or I'm feeding the birds, and I feel bad because in the wintertime it's so cold and I'm worried they're not going to get. They were able to do this long before we invented bird food and squirrel food. And if they didn't, then that's part of that process for them as an animal. People will say, I think it's cute. I love watching the birds all on my property all at one time feeding. But you have to remember that at night, after the birds are sleeping and they go away, the night creatures come out and they're feeding on that. And so we're being real serious about letting people know that no ground feeding of any kind. In fact, it's not even a good idea to put your animal's food outside. If you have a dog that spends a lot of time outside, figure out a system to elevate his food or her food and water off the floor. If you have a rodent even, and I just learned this myself, learned a lot about this whole process. If a rat or a mouse or even any kind of animal that has a disease inside of its body, they're constantly urinating. And so if they happen to do that as they're crossing over your animal's food or your animal's water, there's that possibility that your animal could be exposed to that. So it's probably better to feed your animal inside the house, not really have them out. If you're going to have your animal out for an extended period of time, then of course you want to make sure that they have food and water. But if you can figure out a way to get that off the ground somewhat so that it's not directly exposed to other animals getting into it, that's a good sign. So those are the two things animal related. The other thing is just a lot of things that are being stored outside. We're seeing a lot of properties. Those items should all be inside your garage or inside your home. The outside should not be used as an extended storage area for your property. As you mentioned earlier, rodents look for places that are typically not disturbed, and that's where they kind of burrow under. So, even in the summertime, we've had calls where people have said when they went to remove their child's swimming pool, just those little ones, they realized that underneath it was some activity going on underneath the pool. So it's good to maybe put the pool on a hard surface like the cement. And then the last thing is what we call abandoned vehicles or non-moving vehicles. So if you have a vehicle that typically maybe you only use it seasonal, and I know you know a lot about those kind of vehicles, then that would be something you'd want to store in your garage as opposed to storing it on the property. And absolutely no storage of vehicles, trailers, motorhomes, boats, anything on grass. They always have to be stored on a hard surface. So those are primarily the 4 things, or the 5 things that we're going to be looking at. It has all to do with property maintenance and what's going on in the property. We're trying to eliminate reasons for rodents coming to those properties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the arguments, because I like cruising, I've got 2 vehicles, but I've told them that it's their pride and joy, and they really subject them to these critters who will gnaw at some of the parts in the vehicle.
Right.
And so they'll do a lot of damage, and they are required by ordinance to be on a pad of cement.
Right.
And there's a whole bunch. If you are getting one of those kind of things and want to do temporary storage during the summer while you check the website, check the ordinances, and be in compliance. So we would encourage everybody to do that. We've talked about to informing the public, maybe some type of a brochure. What's going on with that?
Yeah, we've been working. I've been working with Chrissy in your office and Bob Ancrep. We're putting together a brochure. You had done a mailing of one of these several years ago, and it just kind of one went out to every house. It was a real handy, useful thing to have, especially for new folks that are coming into the city and they're not sure of all the different ordinances. But this is probably a collection of about 10 to 12 of the most asked questions when it comes to ordinances. How an animal should be on your property, that it needs to be licensed. It talks about the length of the grass and how long you can let your grass be before it becomes an ordinance violation. So it's going to cover all those same types of things that we did in the previous mailing. We're going to update it. There's been some changes to some of the ordinances. And we're going to actually kind of highlight some properties in the city that we think are folks that are doing a really great job on their properties. We've asked them ahead of time, and we're going to highlight pictures of their properties kind of as examples of what most of the properties in the city look like, really.
That's a good suggestion, because when we put out the brochure in the past, we went to a couple neighboring communities because we didn't want to use anybody in Dearborn Heights, and then everybody say, "Whoa, look, neighbor, your home got into the brochure for the city as to how bad it is." So we went around to the surrounding communities to look for, and it wasn't that difficult to find similar situations, unfortunately.
Yeah, one of the things that I think most people do the right things. Yes. They really do a very good job. If you drive through most areas of our city, I'm impressed all the time at how well people keep up their properties, how much pride they take in them. And so that was one of the things that when Chrissy and I first started talking about it, I said, I really want this brochure to be a positive spin. I want there to be, I want people to, it's an education so that people can be in compliance, but also at the same time so we can highlight all the successes that we also do in the city. We have some really outstanding looking properties. People do a really nice job. You can tell they take pride in where they live. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was in one person's backyard. I was very impressed a couple years ago, but they had a series of fountains, and they actually had fish in there, and it was elaborate and beautiful. I was shocked at the amount, but the whole property, landscaping-wise, I in fact asked the one son, and he said, "Dad makes me cut the lawn every other day, so it looks just like a golf course green." But it showed. It showed, and it was just gorgeous. And but I find the same thing that you just said, that I'll go in as a result of maybe looking at a rezoning property or some other instance, and as I'm driving down the street, a personal amount of pride comes in as to how good that particular neighborhood. And there were a couple that prior to you and your team in that department shows how well you've done, because that might have been, I'm trying to be careful not to mention the streets, but they've improved so dramatically that now it would be the kind of street that I looked at, and my thought was, I wouldn't mind owning a home on this street. It looks very nice. Whereas a couple years ago, anybody was trying to sell their home on that block, there were one or two or three bad ones that you'd say, no, let me find another area. But that seems to have been turned around. And
besides what I do as far as my job goes, and I'm out in all the neighborhoods all the time, I live near the Detroit border in the north end, near Joy and Telegraph. And then I have, family that live in the south end, and then friends all in between. So I'm just as interested in what's going on in all areas of the city. And sometimes I'm surprised. I'll all of a sudden, like you said, I'll be turning a corner and I'll say, wow, this is fantastic. Mm-hmm. You can really tell that people really love where they're living, and they love their home, and they take great pride in that. So.
Yeah, and I don't think it takes that much extra time to just make sure the property looks decent, and as a homeowner, you need the property to be functional and doing the kinds of things that maintenance that's required, or you're going to have more expensive repair,
right?
And that's something you wouldn't want to do. Now, the other item that we didn't touch on was rentals. We have more rentals. We recognize that. That's true of all of the communities in southeastern Michigan. And we're doing some action in regards to landlord rental properties, aren't we?
Yeah, well, recently council changed, did a resolution on the inspection ordinance that now requires that rental properties have to be inspected, just like it was before, at a change of occupancy, but also every 3 years regardless. So even if you have the same tenant in your property for, say, 7 years, you're going to have that property inspected every 3 years. And that, I think, has been probably the most significant improvement in terms of our rental properties, because we are now in those properties every 3 years. But we still rely on folks calling us, and that's a big part of what I'm always asking people to do, is make sure you're calling our office in the ordinance department. If you live on a block or on a street and you see that there's some folks that have moved out and some new folks that have moved in, go ahead and call us. Let us look it up, see if there has been an inspection done, and if not, then we'll make sure that we put an enforcement there that an inspection has to be done. That's very significant. We have, like as you said, the numbers are starting to get higher in terms of rental properties, but I'm not necessarily concerned about that. I think we can, as long as we use the ordinances that we have in place, I think we can effectively manage that.
And we can't emphasize enough, if a resident writes to me, sends me email, phone calls, we make sure, and it's ordinance related, that we flow it through your office. And the very important reason for that, as chief administrators, it's important to know what kind of problems we're having, and then I'll come and ask you, maybe I get 2 emails on a particular problem. Jack, are you getting more of these? But by channeling everything through your department, we're able to keep records and then understanding, and then we can serve the public and respond to those. If people don't go through your office and I come and ask you and you tell me, well, I've had 12 complaints in the last 2 months, when really there's maybe 50 out there, but
right,
no one's told you, then we can't respond as administrators to those problems. It is extremely important, if nothing else is remembered by the people viewing this, is that if there is a problem, a difficulty, it needs to be reported to ordinance if it's an ordinance-related matter.
Right.
If it's a police matter, no. A fire department matter, that's not true. But I made it a point, instructed everybody in my office, that you become aware of all the complaints and issues that we have, so that we can accumulate them and understand what's going on.
Right. That's critical. We have to know the numbers. We have to know what areas are dealing with more issues, or one particular issue in one certain area, so that we can go after it. And really, that's how we are scheduling those sweeps. It's based on information that's come into the department, and I've been able to select certain areas that are experiencing particular ordinance violations in larger numbers, so we're targeting those areas, and that's how we get those. We have to get people to call us. Posting something on Facebook, it's not going to get us, that information is not going to get to our office.
And one of the things I want to say while you're here, I'm very appreciative as the mayor to have you as a department head and the work you've done in ordinance. You've had many challenges through your life, different careers, but as a community activist, I saw how you and others were organized and how you approached. I think you're great with the public, but when I saw how you worked in your own neighborhood, we're lucky as a community to have you not only working in your own neighborhood, but now working in all of our neighborhoods. And I want to thank you for the job that you do, and also your employees, which a lot of people would, and I know on occasion I've had during the weekends, off hours, I've called you, and you've responded. Probably the problem is I got to tell you to go home because you're there too much, and I don't want you to burn out.
We do bump into each other a lot on the weekends.
Yeah, you're.
I hear the door down at the end of the hall, and I know it's you. So.
I see your light, so I figure he's working. But
yeah,
you're right, and I just think the public ought to be aware of the fact that you're on a salary, but so you don't get overtime, but if we paid you overtime, you get a whole bunch of dollars, but you just are so dedicated to the people of Dearborn Heights and your mission and ordinance, and I want to publicly thank you for the great job that you're doing.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad you mentioned the team, because you're nothing without the team that plays for you. And these guys, I've asked them to do things. They're always the first ones there in the morning, the last ones to leave. There's often time, they have to be on call now for animal calls every other weekend. They have to rotate, and we get lots of calls about animals. But it's interesting. They're coming to me all the time with ideas. Like, I think if we do it this way, I think we'll get a better result. These are really thinking people, and they're very invested in what they're doing. All but one live in the city, so they're seeing the benefit to the work that they're doing. And I don't know that they oftentimes, I appreciate that so much, Mayor, because I don't know that oftentimes people understand really how hard they really do work. Mm-hmm. A lot of them try to skip their lunch, and although I insist that they don't do that, I probably should do a better job at taking the lunch myself. But I can't say enough about them. I'm so pleased that I've been given this opportunity, and I appreciate your support.
Well, thank you, and please share with your whole team, and maybe they'll watch the program and see how much we think of them. Jack, we appreciate you being a guest today, and want to thank all the viewers out there for watching. Thank you for watching another edition of the Mayor Dan Plaetko Show.